I will call the October 15th meeting of the Jericho Planning Commission to order. Thank you, Planning Commission members, for being here. I'm actually really looking forward to seeing everybody this evening. And Chris and Fritz, and members of the public, thank you for joining us. Okay, so for our meeting tonight, we'll have time for public comments, review minutes. We will have a conversation with SJ about her interest in joining the Planning Commission. Sarah McLeod left us a few weeks ago. So we have an opening for an unexpired term. Then we will hear from David White, who will be joining us on the Zoom. David is our consultant who's been working with us on updating our zoning regulations, concentrating mostly on the village centers. And then we will hear updates from the planners and any planning commission members, other business, wrap up planning for next meeting, and then we will have an executive session this evening to discuss personnel issues. Then we'll come out of the executive session and adjourn. Does anyone need to suggest any changes to the agenda? Okay, good to go. So next we invite we'll invite public comment. So if you're in the room, if you'd raise your hand. If you're on the Zoom, if you would use the reactions button and use the raise hand feature so that we can recognize you to offer comment. We ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. So please come forward.
5 seconds.
Okay.
I'd like to see who's on the Zoom board. I'm just curious.
Okay.
Can we put that up?
Yeah.
No, anything on the screen has to come from you.
So,
There you go.
There you go.
Oh, my.
So David's there.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I guess I should say, since we have a lot of people here, that the Planning Commission's procedure is to only use the chat button on the Zoom for technical issues or to let us know your name and address that you're attending the meeting. So kind of like a sign in as if you were signing in here. Please do not use the chat to make any comments on the discussion or to offer feedback on the discussion. We have other ways of doing that. We just don't do that here.
Anybody who's is online too, if you are going to speak, you need to introduce yourself and please put your address, mailing address in the chat, because that way we can get a list of the interested parties if we need to send things out, please.
Yeah.
If you don't speak, great. Thank you.
Okay, so anybody else in the room want to offer any public comment? Okay, anybody on the Zoom, if you'd like to offer public comment at this point, if you would use the raise hand feature so we know. Okay, assuming that there is none, I'm gonna move on to approving the minutes. Do I have a motion, like to have an entertaining motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Chris, motion to approve the minutes of October 1st. And a second?
Second.
Sabina, second, thank you. Any corrections or edits or clarifications needed for the minutes? Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes say aye. Aye. Any nays? Any abstentions? All right, the minutes are approved. Okay, the next item of business is to talk with SJ, who's interested to fill a spot on the planning commission. You come forward. Hello, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Very nice to see you here.
Nice to
Thank
see
you
you
for coming in
guys too.
person. Yeah. So we understand that you are interested to fill the spot on the planning commission. We've all had the privilege of working closely with you as the former chair of the Affordable Housing Committee. Learned a lot from you. And we've enjoyed collaborating with you and your committee for a long time. So maybe the best way to use this conversation, since we know each other well and have worked together before, is if you would just take a couple minutes to explain your interest in joining the planning commission.
Yeah, I think one of my priorities as chair of the housing committee was the last couple of years was really to establish and establish a good working relationship with the planning commission. And in doing that, it's meant that I've showed up to a lot of these meetings. I've gotten to work with a lot of you. I've gotten to debate with a lot of you and really appreciate the amount of work that this commission does and the kind of work that you all do. And the work of the housing committee is a lot of education and advocacy. And it feels like a natural progression to move from that work into doing some of the more kind of effective work. For a town like Jericho, I think that a lot of our housing goals are going to be met through regulation and through zoning. And so I've established and collected a strange set of resources and skills and connections. And I'd like to continue to use those and still serve my community and get a chance to work on a team like this one. And so it feels like a really natural progression. This opportunity came up a little sooner than I was expecting, but I think because I have either attended or watched every meeting that y'all have had in the last couple of years and gone through a lot of the documentation because it's very relevant to the work of the housing committee. I feel familiar with the work that you all have been doing, and I don't think it'll be a heavy lift to get caught up. And yeah, it feels like a real natural progression, and it would be a real honor to get to work with you.
Any planning commission members want to ask SJ some questions?
I don't have any questions to ask, having worked with SJ for a couple of years now. I'm comfortable with her on the commission. She's comfortable on the committee too, but not the commission.
Any concerns or questions for us?
No, I think one of the things that I'm kind of excited about is this group of, I think Susan has said it many times, this group of people, everyone on this commission is really capable and invested and engaged, and it really feels like you all work as a team and really distribute the load evenly amongst each other and have substantive and respectful dialogue and conversation. And I'm really excited about being able to be a part of that.
So I guess I would ask a question just because obviously housing has been a passion. If technically we all have our liaisons to other committees, and I'm wondering if there's another secondary group that you are watching or area, sort of within the town where you think, that could be a really neat thing to spend a little more time in a liaison role.
Yeah.
And seeing the interconnectivity between what they're doing, what we're doing, and where you left off with housing.
I think, that the overlap with housing is really significant. And I don't know that it's necessarily a liaison role in the traditional way that we all have been doing liaison, in the sense that you all have planning commission members who actually sit on other committees. But I do think that having someone with more connection with the work of the DRB and to build some more kind of communication about what's happening in there, identifying some of the recurring issues, and just kind of having that on the radar. I think it helps to have the leaders speaking, and I think it also helps to have another person just kind of I don't know, checking in or picking up on things. And so that feels like an area that makes some sense to me, but.
And I'm not asking that you would do it, but I'm just curious, because I know you have checked in over this last few years, really been watching all the different opportunities and connections, and so thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that conservation is a really important one for Jericho specifically, but just in general. I think that housing and conservation often get pitted against each other. And I think that they need to be partners at the table. But you have really strong conservation representation on the planning commission. And so I think that that relationship exists. I think that the work of the Diversity and Equity and Inclusion Committee is important. Again, you have representation there, but really thinking about the socioeconomic diversity in our community and making sure that the regulations aren't inadvertently and disproportionately impacting those members of our community is really important. And so having that connection there, I think is a big one. But again, you all have that to some degree already.
So in your observations of us for the last couple of years, have there been things that you were frustrated by or wish we had done differently?
Oh, that's evil.
Fascinating. I mean, the only thing that comes to mind is the speed with which things are done, which I think that's a nature of this kind of work. It just works at that pace. And it's glacial. And there are reasons for that. And some of them are good and some of them are just feasibility. I do wonder if more than one project could be happening at a time. I think that you all, with the town plan, did a great job of outlining a lot of different priorities that are, first year, 3 year, 5 year, et cetera. And with a committee this size, maybe we can be doing, or you can be doing more than one thing at a time. But again, as somebody who's been doing this work, like I get it is the nature of the beast.
Else? Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
I'm gonna check in from home because
Okay.
those are currently unattended.
Yeah, that's fine.
Screens should be off, so I'll check in from.
Okay, I think the process is that we huddle this evening and then probably through Paula, you'll get some sort of notice.
Okay.
So what's gonna end up happening is basically the position is still being advertised. It closes on the 21st.
Okay.
So if there are any additional people who submit, the planning commission will hear them on the 29th. And then they'll forward their recommendation to the select board who will set up a meeting with you or whoever for the select board to review, and then they'll make an appointment out of the candidates. If there are no candidates, then it's pretty obvious and easy, but that's the way the process is going to be running.
Okay.
So you can check in with either me or Linda to see if there's other candidates. And we'll know, well, it closes on the 21st. So currently, I believe there aren't any. One person did express verbal interest, but from what I understand, they haven't submitted anything yet. So.
Okay.
So.
All right. Thanks.
Stay tuned.
Will do. Thanks, guys.
Nice.
Okay, ready to welcome David? I thought I saw him coming on.
He's here and he has sharing capabilities, so we should be all set.
Okay.
Good evening.
So, hi, David.
You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Great.
Hope you're feeling well. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm feeling pretty good. Every day is a step forward. Sometimes a little tentative, but still a step ahead. All right, I'm going to share my screen and get right into it. All right, can you see that? Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
All right. Oh. Okay, so tonight is the last of what have been 3 meetings to discuss proposed changes to the regulations based on our conversations back in April through June. And tonight we're going to be focusing on a draft red line amendments to section 13, which is formerly the character-based zoning, now referred to as the Riverside Village Code that was provided to you last month. The Riverside Village Code, as I said, is a revised version of the character-based zoning that was adopted by the Select Board back in 2022. Much of the detail is still the same, but it has been completely reorganized and significantly shortened to try to eliminate a number of redundancies and just unnecessary language. However, the new Riverside Village Code is still section 13 of the overall zoning code, and there are 7 different parts, as you see here on the screen. We're going to walk through each one of them briefly. So first part, section 13.1, general administrative legal references that are found in the code. There are a few things here I'm going to want to talk about in a little bit more detail. But this is basically an outline of what you'll find in section 13.1. So in general, this was a section of the code that got a significant cleanup. A lot of duplication and what I found to be really unnecessary and confusing language. One of the things I really focused on here is to be sure that there's a clear relationship between what applies under the form code and what applies under the conventional zoning. So there's a section by section breakdown of what aspects of the conventional zoning still apply, which is really everything except for section 5, which are the dimensional standards, and 2 parts of section 10, the dimensional waivers in the PUD. Everything else, for one reason or another, is still going to be quite applicable under the form-based code. Removed any of the references to application requirements in favor of section 10.2. Again, it's redundant. There's only one application process for a zoning permit in Jericho. There only needs to be one. I specifically added a process for reviewing and approving applications that are involving civic spaces and civic buildings by the DRB. This is something that was missing in the character-based zoning. It referenced these civic features, but not, so how do you get one permitted? So I've created that structure. And I've added separate sections regarding the authority for providing administrative relief as well as alternative compliance to be approved by the DRB. And these are a couple of things I want to talk about in a little bit more detail. So one is the development review process. I've tried to keep the process largely the same, but I think there's one area that I'd like you to think about a little bit more, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But basically, any application that conforms to all of the standards of the Riverside Village Code and other standards that might be applicable, like sign regulations and parking regulations and things like that, and doesn't specifically require DRB approval, can be approved by right by the administrative officer. Only those things that are specifically required for the DRB to review are listed here below. Things like conditional use, civic buildings and civic spaces, alternative compliance, variances, applications that trigger overlay zoning districts and the like. So I mentioned there's one area that I'd like you to consider opening up for zoning administrator approval or by right approval. And that's allowing for all site plans to be reviewed by the administrative officer. And I hope you'll see as we go through the ordinance itself that the form code already provides many specific standards regarding most of the concerns one might have regarding larger projects. So in the end, there's very little discretion left to be exercised by the DRB. So why waste their time and effort in reviewing a project just to see that, oh, yep, it satisfies this requirement. Yep, it satisfies this requirement. The language is pretty specific, so there's not a lot of room for the DRB to say, you know, to kind of exercise their judgment. So as you're looking at this and thinking about this, that's one thing that I would recommend allowing the administrative officer to do all site plan reviews. Of course, unless it involves, you know, a major subdivision and it, you know, requires a new street. But other than that, it should be pretty straightforward. The other thing I want to focus on is what I refer to as relief in the code. So the standards throughout the Riverside Village Code and really any form-based code are very prescriptive and detailed, which is intended to take much of the guesswork and discretion out of the review process. In turn, it makes that process much more predictable and efficient. However, every site and every project is different, and there's so many different ways to get done what you need to get done on a project-by-project basis that you need to build in some avenue of flexibility. Traditionally, the only choice applicants have had has been to seek a variance. But under statutory rules and standards, seeking a variance should be extremely difficult to get. On purpose. So there needs to be a relief valve where some flexibility for regulatory standards can be granted that are short of seeking a variance. So as built into the Riverside Village Code, there's two parts of that. First is relief that the zoning administrator can provide. So there are kind of review criteria, standards that need to be met in the zoning administrator's review, and generally they can allow for up to 10% variation from any numerical standard. And then in this table, a number of specific kind of known issues where we want to be sure to grant some flexibility. I'm not going to walk through these. I'll let you do this in your review, and maybe you already have. But so the first level of waiver, if you will, is by the zoning administrator. The second is through the development review board. So if the zoning administrator can't offer the relief necessary, then the applicant can go to the DRB and after a public hearing seek relief based on a defined set of review criteria that affords the discretion that they might need while keeping any modification within the bounds and the purpose and the intent of the form-based code and whatever standards our relief is being sought from. So this is kind of the next level of zoning administrator can't help, but I can go to the DRB to ask for help. Again, every project is different and we need to be sure that there's built in some flexibility. So those are a couple of things I wanted to highlight in section 13.1. I'm going to just keep going here unless I hear Susan or somebody, you know, piping in, and we can kind of take questions and go piece by piece in a second round if that works for you. So the next part, section 13.2, is the regulating plan. So a regulating plan is really just the
Can I
zoning
interrupt
map.
for a second, David?
Oh, sorry.
Can I interrupt for a second? Can you go back one page? I just want to see if I can get a clarification from you.
Yeah.
On a lot, one more. There you go, top line lot dimensions, maximum lot dimensions can be expanded as necessary to accommodate on-site water and wastewater.
Correct.
Would it be possible to, and would it make sense at this time, to also incorporate that minimum lot dimensions can be decreased if there is off-site water and wastewater? So in other words, if we get municipal water and wastewater onto the site, can we automatically allow for smaller lot sizes?
So those smaller lot sizes are kind of already factored into the dimensional standards for the form district. And you'll see in many cases, there aren't minimums. There are really just maximums. So that kind of level of flexibility, I'm not sure is really necessary. Because the idea behind all of this is, of course, is to make it possible for smaller and more compact development to happen. It's not always going to be possible. It's not always going to be desired by the property owner and the applicant, but we at least want to make it possible. Does that
Fair enough.
answer your question?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So the regulating plan. This goes back to changes we talked about in the spring. I removed sections regarding the preparation and subsequent amendment of the initial regulating plan. It's really unnecessary. This is the zoning map. The process for amending the map as well as amending the regulations is well defined in the conventional zoning as required by statute, so you don't need to say it again here. We removed former character district number 3. We adjusted the boundaries to former character district 4, now referred to as the Riverside Village Center, and added Mills Riverside Park and the school complexes as civic spaces. So here is the regulating plan. Again, pretty much as we discussed back in the spring. So, so everything we've talked about at this point really centers around establishing the basis and purpose for the code and covering several different administrative kind of operational aspects of how the code works. Before diving in any farther, I want to take a step back to make sure that everyone has a common understanding of how the various parts of a form-based code work together and ultimately what is we're trying to achieve at the end of the process. So form-based codes generally, and this one in particular, are designed like a kit of parts where the applicant has a series of choices to select from, but where each one is designed to help meet the overall goals of creating a walkable mixed-use place. So there are 3 different yard types, there are multiple building types, there are multiple frontage types. You know, an applicant can pick and choose from these elements based on what it is that they're trying to do on their property and what's enabled by the given form district. You're not locked into anything in particular in most cases, but when you select a building type, then you need to conform to the requirements of that specific building type. So the specific standards that are created to govern different aspects of the development are very hierarchical. As you move up the hierarchy, the specificity and scope of the standards get narrower and narrower, from site to building to frontage. And the standards below may be superseded by a more detailed standard above. And you'll see this playing itself out when you look at the requirements for the form district and how some of those, it offers, you know, lot size or lot dimensional requirements, by example, but it makes note how they can vary based on the building type. It's, again, very important to note that the standards are very prescriptive and detailed, which is intended to take the guesswork and discretion out of the review process. That's what makes administrative by right approval possible and in turn makes a form-based code so much more predictable and efficient. Because you've spelled out in some detail exactly what the expectations are. If there's a problem with meeting some of those expectations, then there are avenues around, seeking relief. But ultimately, the code lays out, this is what we expect to see. And it's never always going to be the right thing for every site or circumstances, and that's why that flexibility is so important. Unlike conventional zoning, it's not a one-size-fits-all proposition. So when it's all said and done, what we're striving for is the creation of a walkable place. So we have to put people, and specifically pedestrians, first and foremost in our perspective when we're looking at proposed development. What we care most about is what that pedestrian experience is from the street, from a sidewalk. We care less and less about what happens as you go deeper and deeper in the lot. Because this is about, it's all about the interface between the public and the private realm. So while there's really a lot more to it that goes into what it takes to create a walkable place, like comfort and safety and lighting and things like that, these are some of the primary physical characteristics of a place that make people feel comfortable from an urban design perspective. And the form-based code is designed to hit on these as much as possible, from how the building is placed on the site to how that building interfaces with the public street, and what that pedestrian experience looks and feels like. So that's the focal point. Back to the code. So 13.3, these are the form districts, and as well as civic zones. So at the most basic level of the hierarchy I described before, there are form districts. There's only one in the current case, where primarily site level characteristics of new development are covered. This is similar to what you might find in Section 5 of the conventional zoning districts, but it also sets the stage for the application of other elements of the Riverside Village Code. It provides general standards that apply to all situations in all form districts, as well as specific standards that are unique to any individual form district. It also establishes civic zones in all civic space types. When we talk about civic space types, we're really talking about as spaces parkland that comes in different configurations and public or other civic uses. The civic space types may or may not be located in a civic zone. They can be, but a larger development in particular may include a civic space, an area of open common recreation land, or a natural corridor as part of its overall design. So these are the standards then you'll find for the Riverside Village Center District. As I said, many of these are quite similar to what is currently in the code today, with some variation based on some of the things we talked about. As I mentioned, in many cases, there are no minimums. If you want, and particularly in this kind of district, if you want to build right on the front property line, you can. You don't have to. So that's where maximums are important in order to make sure that buildings, are closer to the street and have more of a direct relationship to the street. You'll see under, frontage width and front setback on the principal frontage. Those are a couple of examples where a building type may differ in where the building gets placed based on the yard type that is selected. So these are site-related issues like the dimensions of a lot, the allowed building, yard, and civic space types that you can have in this form district, where buildings get placed, location of parking, things like that. Uses, you perhaps can see here, are found in section 4 of the conventional zoning. That's where all uses for all zoning districts, including the form district, are found in a single section in a single table. So this simply makes reference to where to find information about what uses are permitted or conditionally permitted. Section 13.4, principal buildings and private frontages. So this is the next level of detail beyond the form districts. The form districts say which principal building types are allowed in that form district. In this case, all of them. And in this section of the ordinance, now we get into what are the general standards that apply to every building type, and then specific standards that apply to each individual building type. The same holds true for the private frontage types, which is where the building truly interfaces with the public realm, the facade of the building, that elevation of the building that faces the public street. Again, there are general standards that apply to all private frontage types, and specific standards that apply to each one individually. So here's some examples. These are the building types. So focused primarily on building related characteristics like dimensions, primarily width and height, setbacks and yard types, where entrances are located, openings on a facade. Building types are not typically about use, although some will lend themselves better to different uses, i.e. a townhouse, is probably going to be residential, but it didn't have to be. Same with a house. Fabrication warehouse is probably not going to be residential, but it could be. This section is only applicable to the primary building that's located at the front of the lot. Other accessory buildings are permitted, but do not have any specific standards that apply to them other than their location being behind a principal building. And the other thing I'll note here is that the form district allows for multiple principal buildings at a frontage. So if you have a lot that is wide enough where you might want to put 2 buildings right at the frontage with a driveway in the middle, as an example, you can do that. Or a principal building at the frontage and another principal building type behind that building before you get to any outbuildings. So there's a lot of flexibility built into how this works. The other part here then are the private frontage types. So the buildings themselves define, the building types define what frontage types, private frontage types, are permitted for each. And the use that is selected may further refine which one may work best in any given situation. This is focused primarily on how the building engages with the street, like building placement, common characteristics of that feature, like a stoop, in defining what typically is a stoop, location of the principal entrance, which is always on the facade of the building, clear path of travel, and the like. So again, the granularity in the level of detail gets narrower and narrower as you go from form district to building type to frontage type. Next section, kind of a catch-all. General development standards applies to all development under the form code. And it really explains things like what are the 3 lot layers, what are the 3 yard types, and what is building placement all about. Provides parking and loading locations and standards. It makes reference to section 11.2, which is where the minimum on-site parking requirements are. That language probably needs to be a little bit clearer, but it's there. And again, it's where it points back to the conventional zoning for other details. Provide standards for the location and screening of solid waste storage areas. This is something new, but is a really common site plan issue for where the dumpster is going to go. This addresses that very clearly. Where are they going to go and how do they get screened? And it provides some references regarding signs, but largely points back to the conventional zoning where the sign standards are. Section 13.6 are thoroughfares. These are streets. These are streets that are open and accessible to the public to use. So i.e. public thoroughfares. It establishes all of the thoroughfare types that are permitted in the form district, including general standards that apply to all of them, and then specific standards for each one. Establishes bikeway types, public plantings, and public lighting standards. The only changes I made to this section was to add a mixed-use street type. There's a Park Street that is the closest example in the current regulations, and it needed another thoroughfare type that had buildings on both sides of the street, not just one, as kind of a commercial street. So that's what the mixed-use street type is. And I corrected some errors with the protected bike lane and Sharrow bikeway types. Basically, they duplicated each other. It was the same image with the same standards. And I've corrected that so that they are truly distinctive. And the last part of this code are the definitions. And this one's really simple. I simply removed all references to uses. As you recall, all of the uses are found in section 4 of the conventional zoning, and every one of them is represented in, everyone that is represented in the use table is defined in section 2. So we don't need to duplicate it here. In fact, we want to avoid duplication whenever and wherever possible. So that's my quick overview. Just some, the coming attractions here where once I get all of the comments and all 3 sets of the proposed changes, I'll prepare a final recommended draft for your review before you schedule your public hearing, which would kick off the formal development, the formal adoption process. So I will stop sharing my screen, and we can always come back to it as necessary. Stop. And video. Okay. Susan, I'll take your lead here.
You left her speechless.
It's a lot. I get it.
Well, I'm thinking about it because a number of us prepared written comments ahead of time on the draft. But a lot of those comments I think are probably better suited toward more of a just an email to you, like here's a typo, or here's why is this or why is that. So
yeah.
I guess what I would maybe say is that a number of the comments from planning commission members were started with the question why, meaning like, why is this important? Why do we have to regulate this? Why is this dimension what it is? And that's the part that I think that would be most useful to have a dialogue with you about, because I found the overview that you just provided very helpful, because it, gave boxes and structures around the elements of the red line. And so I can see the logic of why you made certain decisions. But I know that there's a lot of questions from the planning commission about why. So I guess that's what I would suggest, is that we try to maybe first surface our questions around why, especially like big ticket items. That would be helpful to have David's feedback on. paired with our follow-up session on the 29th will be a more detailed working among ourselves that where we can deliver comments to you.
And
So,
Susan,
how does that-
let me answer that generally, and then we can get to, you know, perhaps some specific whys. So again, if this form-based codes are intended to be applied by right by the administrative officer, so there's very little discretion that is afforded to the administrative officer in deciding that, yes, this project can be approved. It means you need to be more detailed. You need to be more specific about what exactly do you mean by a porch? You know, does anything go? Are there particular definitions or physical characteristics about the features of a different one type of porch versus another? When you say when you mention these things, a lot of this stuff is in the current code, but they're not defined in any way as to know what's intended here and how is this supposed to work. So you provide that specificity in order to make it very clear to the applicant, to concerned property owners, to the zoning administrator, exactly what's expected, and whether or not this is something they can approve or not. That's the overall purpose there.
But so, for example, there's, you know, there was a requirement that, I don't know, an awning or a canopy not be translucent. So I would say the general impression I had from reading everybody's notes, including my own, were that if this requirement can truly be evidence that it makes it walkable, or it makes it cost effective, or it makes it more inclusive, then the planning commission seemed to not question it. If there were requirements that seemed to us purely aesthetic, even though none of us talked about it, all the comments were the same. Like, who cares? Why? We don't need to tell people what to do to this level of detail, unless we know that that particular element is what contributes to a more walkable space, or a more compact space, or denser development. So I understand, you know, maximums can help with that, or frontages can help with that. So even like big picture, I'm not even sure why we need to be, you use the word prescriptive. And a lot of the comments came back from the planning commission people like, this is so overly prescriptive. Why are we being so prescriptive? And so I look at something like frontage type, and you explained that the frontage type is really you're integrating the private space with the public realm. But I'm not really convinced that there's a positive result from classifying frontage types into these very discrete categories that have very specific requirements. Like, you know, I might want to build a house with a courtyard, or they just seemed too rigid overall, I would say. So the whys are yes, we want things to be automatically approved, but unless there's a reason why it wouldn't be approved, then why do we need to prescribe it? I would say in general. So like that example about a translucent canopy, Church Street is filled with translucent canopies. Like, why is that something that the zoning should regulate? And I have like 100 examples of those that came from all of the planning commission members, which we don't really have time to go through point by point. But I would say, in terms of delivering feedback to you and you're working on the draft, if it's remotely aesthetic, I don't have the sense that this planning commission will support it unless you can convince us that it has a functional advantage. And I'm speaking for the planning commission now in the interest of getting the conversation going, but welcome other points of view, or, you know, if that's not how you perceived it, because I didn't get notes from everybody, but we got notes from a lot of people. So,
So whoever didn't
That's
send me
my
notes,
first.
send me notes because I got notes from two. So,
I have some for you.
yeah,
Okay.
Heidi has notes and I have notes.
so I
And
got notes from two.
my notes kept overlapped with everybody else's notes.
Okay, well,
So that I would say that's the general feedback is that, yes, we want to be prescriptive so we can have administrative review. I think the way you structured administrative review versus DRB is helpful and will help speed up the review process and will grease the skids so more applications can go sailing through without public hearings, without a lot of rigmarole, and that's good. I didn't have too many concerns about that. It was really in a lot of the detailed specifications.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
I know that, I thought it was in a different section where Chris Brown worked with a couple of other planning commission members around the architectural design features.
yes. So that is this same
That's what I
section.
thought. Because, yeah, so when I looked at it, what I was trying to figure out, like, David, if you had received that and already incorporated it, or was there a disconnect and that was still going to be considered?
yes, he hasn't received it yet.
Okay, that's really helpful, because I, some of the things that I saw, I thought, really, this, Chris?
Right,
Really?
we thought we nixed a lot of this stuff,
Yeah.
3 meetings ago.
Right, that would be helpful, because I think there's some really there was a very thoughtful process that went into that didn't seem to jive with some of the red lines that I was looking at. So I'm glad to hear that it's not, David, you hadn't had it, so of course you wouldn't know it, right? Okay.
I have recently received comments from Chris Brown about this new draft of this section, which I've started to look at, but certainly is not part of what you have and because he's reacting to that. The previous conversations was about an entire section in and of itself on architectural standards that is in the current code that, we ended up deleting probably 70 to 80% of it. And the rest of it then got sprinkled into other parts of either form district standards or building standards, that type of thing. So that's where you may be seeing things where, either I felt it was still important to include or wanted to give you a chance to see how it could work differently. Particularly when it comes to frontage types, that's something, again, it's part of the current regulations. It's not well articulated. So my purpose here was to try to better articulate it. But to be clear, not all form codes have utilized frontage types. I don't know that they necessarily have to have that level of prescriptive detail, but yours does. So I thought it important to explain what these things actually are.
I think what you provided, Dave, was good. And I also think basically it leads to a good form of discussion for the planning commission to wrap their head around. So when something does get finalized or brought forward, you can support it. You need to support what's being proposed. So understanding what frontages or a porch or fences in the front yard or whatever it may be, whether you want them or not, you need to be able to support that decision. And I think having that sort of dialogue, but I think what was presented tonight starts to give a little bit of a better visual of what we're looking at, as opposed to a piece of paper with words. So.
Right. Oh, it is super helpful.
Yeah.
It's super helpful. And it's good to know that it is possible to achieve the objectives that we're talking about without necessarily going to that same level of prescriptiveness that is in the current draft. So we can take some things out and it would not undo all the goodness.
Right.
The intent to streamline, to create. I think one of the things that, do you mind if I just say one last thing, Susan?
Go ahead.
The other balance I would love for us to put in our criteria, right, are to streamline, right? to create the diversity of types that allow for the diversity of, types of units, meaning people units, and the diversity of people who might want to live there. Right, so part of the challenge for me in reading and I'm not expressing this well, but part of the challenge in reading the prescriptiveness means it feels like it then leaves out, right? So it's saying like, you must conform to these things, which means there are fewer options, there's less opportunity to be creative, and it'll be a bit more cookie cutter, which leads us to not having as broad a diversity of housing, for example, options integrated in when that is one of our primary goals, is to increase housing for people across the age range, across the ability range, and across the economic range. So if we are too prescriptive, do we inadvertently undercut that goal that we have very strongly in the town plan? So I would just like, David, as you're looking at your, sort of what's the why, that be held front and center, that is another value that we hold.
Bravo!
Thank you, whoever said that.
Chris Brown.
So David, I guess, what I would say is that as we all know, the current form-based code is highly prescriptive and, seems to me, to be, written partly to ensure that Jericho doesn't get attached corners, and partly with the idea of, kind of a Sturbridge Village, if you know that reference, sort of Nantucket kind of aspiration, which I think is misplaced, in my opinion. And I guess this process that we've been doing is partly reactionary to what we currently have. And my question is, if for you, I guess, or for all of us, is there a way to remove all of the prescriptive stuff that we don't need and distill this down into the bare minimum that will allow the form-based code to do what we want it to in Riverside? So just to, I guess, almost not starting from scratch, but instead of starting from the current and crossing off, think of it at the same time as like, okay, if we were starting this from scratch, what are the really most important high order elements of this that would really help us get to where we want in Riverside?
Sure, and I think, your question, all of you, your question is for any given standard might be why? Why is this important? Typically I would look at these things and go, why do we care? Do we care about this? If there were nothing in the code that described awnings and canopies, when the DRB looks at a project today, is that something that they're looking at? Is that something that they care about? Is that something that, if somebody, looks to do something wildly different, is going to be a problem rather than being, yes, there's a lot of specificity just in that particular area itself that could probably quite easily be stripped out. But, in the broader context, are these things that we care about as a community? Are these things that are common in the community, in Riverside, that are part of the existing pattern of development that we're looking to perpetuate, but intensify and diversify? So as you're looking through that, that maybe is a question I put back to you all in your thinking. Ultimately, yes, there are a handful of basic elements that are must-haves in order to achieve what it is you're trying to achieve.
Like you said one of the most important things is that it's a walkable space, for example.
Correct.
And
that's a
yet,
principal objective.
Yeah, right. Except every thoroughfare type, other than a greenway, assumes vehicles. So when you look at like a subdivision plan, the form-based code didn't produce or is not likely to produce a subdivision plan that has pedestrian-only networks. Everything is like a sidewalk by the street, and it's like, it's not even that big of an area. So to me, that's like a kind of a, really would be a really unfortunate consequence is that every pedestrian way is sharing that way with a vehicle. If there's no, you know, there should be 10 thoroughfare types or whatever, you know, there should be thoroughfare types that are pedestrian only that are well used throughout the various developments that occur there.
Sure,
So that-
you could have a type that was specific to, you know, a pedestrian path. I mean, you have three or four types for bikeways in different situations, right? Some of it is standalone, you know, shared, and some of it is in the road. You could have one or more variations of pedestrian paths as part of your thoroughfare standards. That you could do that. You could also, and I've suggested this before, you could take it out of the code entirely and incorporate what works best for you into the public works standards, where the rest of the street standards around town are located. So it's all in one
Yes.
place and it's all kind of thought out that way.
Yes, but I think procedurally, we're gonna get to this result a lot faster if we don't split it out now. We can, once we get it nailed down, we can split it out technically later in a separate step, because right now those street standards are here and they're much more specific than what's in the public works standards.
Right.
Can I just
Yeah,
have one pet peeve here?
yeah,
I'm annoyed by it.
Yeah.
Sorry, folks. Can we get, I don't know what the nomenclature is these days, but I'm certainly hopeful that we can get rid of the word pedestrian, because it assumes on foot.
yeah.
And as we're planning, we're gonna have a lot of folks, ideally, who are not just on foot. And what I mean is we are gonna have people with walkers, we're gonna have people in wheelchairs, we're gonna have people who, I really feel icky when we use the word walkable and pedestrian in a way that it leaves out certain mobility abilities.
Yeah.
So I understand it's a term we've used historically, and David, I do appreciate that you put in quotes on your slide, but as you're thinking forward, if you can, if there's gotta be some other way that folks are thinking about talking about it, because it does carry with it, because we think about it as pedestrian, we may unwittingly find ourselves narrowing our creativity or our scope. And I would hate to see us do that.
Okay, I also had a big picture question about civic zone, thinking about, there's civic spaces, there's civic buildings, there's civic uses, and there's a civic zone. And I wasn't quite sure why we need a civic zone if we have all those other civic things within this area. And like one thing I thought of in particular is that the Underhill ID school used to be a school. Now it's administrative offices. 10 years from now, could it be an apartment building? But not if it's necessarily in a civic zone. Like, I don't understand what civic zone does for us, that maybe certain things should be open space, which we already have a district for, or if we have uses in buildings and other civic items, why we need a civic zone.
So it's really
that's
just
a quick
to demonstrate or illustrate that those lands are public lands. You know, you're right, the library is also as part of that grouping of properties. Playing fields, playgrounds, and things like that behind it.
So does that mean they're public because they're publicly owned? So it's about who owns them as opposed to,
Yes, but it's, it is a community or civic use. So that's where, I hesitate around ownership because typically churches and museums and things like that might also fit under a civic definition, and they're not necessarily publicly owned. But again, they're community oriented uses and activities in buildings and spaces.
So why does it need its own zone? Because I have two examples for you based on what your red line was. One, what if the town bought a lot in Riverside and decided to put town hall there? Then what? Suddenly now you have to create, that becomes a civic zone just because a municipal entity bought a lot and decided to use it for a community benefit reason. That's sort of like example number one. Example number two is you had civic spaces like parks and playgrounds, but there wasn't really a requirement that those would be publicly accessible. So I make my, cool little cottage community and I make a playground and I say, keep out unless you live here. And yet that's defined by the code as a civic space. So those things were too murky for me. Like they weren't quite clear enough because I could think of too many examples where they wouldn't work.
Yep, and that's true that those civic spaces may not necessarily be open to the general public, but they're open to the community. Maybe it's the development that created it, if it's a playground or something like that. That your town hall example, that would just be a civic building on a lot. It wouldn't, you wouldn't need to make it part of a civic zone necessarily. I mean, but you're right, the civic spaces, buildings, types and the like are a little murky.
But that part of the form-based code is really almost more academic than practical. Right? I mean, it's from in an academic context, you have all kinds of different building types and public spaces and private spaces, and there's a whole gamut of them. But they don't have a particular regulatory use in Riverside.
Correct. It's just the whole process is discretionary. You go through the DRB in order to permit any civic space or civic building.
But is that a little backwards? Like that wouldn't we I guess because we want compact development there, so you don't necessarily want to reserve too much space that's not going to be developed, but why make the hurdle higher to build a playground than to build a building?
Well, if you're creating a civics,
Especially if it's a private playground, but.
Yeah. I mean, the intent is that civic spaces are trying to be afforded greater flexibility. They come in many shapes and sizes for many different kinds of purposes. They're community spaces, they're community functions that the community ought to take a closer look at defining, what's appropriate in this location.
I would say I love conceptually the idea of being really clear and being very purposeful about part of land use is about creating connections amongst people and creating public spaces that are inviting and public spaces that are available for a variety of things. Sounds like we just might have some definitional challenges still. But I appreciated that you ensured that there was some beginning of it, because it marks for us that this is important to us, that civic spaces are important. And now we just have to get a better definition of them.
Okay, what about, we haven't heard from Sabina or Wendy.
Well, I'm gonna keep on that civic space, the civic zone example for a little bit. See if I can articulate this. So I'm getting confused in the relationship between a civic zone and the general table of uses. Because it feels to me like that civic activity is a use of the land that should be in that table. And it can appear is not the right word. That it can appear in multiple zoning districts, not just a civic zone. So it feels more like a use to me, and it
Yes.
belongs in the table of uses.
Yes.
And those traditionally kind of civic type uses, as you mentioned, are found in the use table. There are libraries and museums and municipal buildings and things like that as uses that are in the use table, defined and, permitted or conditionally permitted in various districts.
But then wouldn't it be more consistent just for it to live in the table of uses and not have a zone?
Was the zone the pocket park, or is that a different definition? Because I
That's
love
a
that.
civic space type,
That's civic space type, not a zone. Okay,
right?
thank you. Then I'm in the civic space type, being separate than the use.
So the zone that David's shown, basically, as you said, basically it houses the school, it houses the library, it houses those type of civic uses in a specific area. So he's called out, here's a zone where there are civic entities. And so that has a place or a purpose. Then there are all sorts of civic spaces, whether that's a park or a playground or a museum or a library. And those uses would be in the use table, and they could be incorporated throughout the town through the use table and the allowance for them in the different zone districts. So if you can separate the two, sort of say, well, here's a zone that's got civic type uses on it. So we're calling it that. And we're gonna have a park over here. That's not a civic zone. That's a use that's in this area, whether it's in the Riverside Village or in the commercial district or in the forestry district or wherever. Those are uses that would be allowed.
And don't we need to rezone MMU as a
Right.
civic zone in the elementary school and this building?
Right.
It just feels,
Not really.
it doesn't feel
No,
consistent.
Right, I agree.
I think
Doesn't feel
consistency is
consistent.
important.
Yeah.
It
I also-
comes up around that also. Say this is a civic zone because it's got a school in it or a library. Does that in and of itself say this can only ever be
Exactly.
a civic zone? And if we can make it something else, why don't we call it something else today? And its current use is civic, and make civic an allowed use within that zone.
Right.
So maybe the easy threshold, David, is to get rid of the civic zone.
Yeah.
Come on.
District. I mean,
No, I think
Got
that's where I'm hearing the comfort level of the commission is it's confusing, and I get it. That if you got rid of the concept of the civic zone, you've got civic uses, you've got this generic civic building, and you've got these civic space types, which simply account for different types of kind of open parkland, whether it's a park or a square or a greenway or whatever, that seems like it needs to fit someplace where you allow for, some of those typically formal, but even informal green spaces. But if you got rid of the civic zone altogether and just allowed these things to happen in those places, it would be a simpler fit.
Yes.
Yes.
And also in the definition, there's something in there that a civic space can be municipal or house of worship or this or that. And then there's also, or a nonprofit. And I'm just saying the NFL is a nonprofit. So to me, that is way too big of an umbrella to just enable any nonprofit to have that benefit of that regulatory entity.
Yeah, fair point.
Okay.
I do want to get back, if we could, to, we were talking about got a little sidetracked on the walking thoroughfares, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Can't even do non-motorized because some wheelchairs are electric. And
I know, that's why I was.
without getting into
Yeah,
ADA requirements.
Yeah.
I really do like the idea, and I believe it would be beneficial to designate specific pathways as the equivalent of Church Street. This is a morning deliveries only. Other than that, you're walking, you're being pushed in a wheelchair, you're doing whatever it is you need to do for motorization, and encourage that slow moving, not enclosed in a vehicle type of traffic. So that would be, again, a Church Street type of area that we designate within the district.
Yeah,
The problem is, one of the challenges with the Riverside area is that so much of it is undeveloped right now. And so in a way, I've always thought because of that, the form-based code is an odd application for form-based code because there's nothing there in a way, but it would make it harder to say this needs to be non-motorized.
Well, we can certainly say if you're going to put in a unit of, let's say you're gonna put in 10 buildings that are gonna be multifamily or multi-use buildings, and they're each gonna be 4 stories high, to say that streets with vehicular access is on the back, and in the front, you have non-vehicular access to encourage shops to grow in there. You're still creating a grid system, but you're just making sure there is a way to explore that grid system without being in a 4-wheel motorized vehicle that's for multiple occupants. I'm really trying to.
I know, right? It's really hard.
You're doing well.
Yes.
So I want to point out to the board, the majority of the undeveloped property in Riverside has received a subdivision permit, which has laid out roads, which has laid out the thoroughfares, which has laid out the sidewalks, which has laid out the lots. So the owner of it has vested interest in that. So what you're talking about may come to fruition, may not come to fruition, just to point out, before you get too far, because the last thing I would want to hear is, well, this is what we wanted, but this is not what we got, because it's already received the subdivision approval for actually all the undeveloped lot behind the supermarket. And it's already had the layout. That's not to say that things wouldn't change or be amended, but there is a plan and design in place. So just so you're aware of that.
So we can say we encourage that in any development, and then it's up to them to decide what they want to do.
Right, and there's still undeveloped properties elsewhere, but and the whole intent is to make sure there's a lot of connectivity between all the properties. So some of it may be achievable, all of it may be achievable, but right now there is vested interest in the undeveloped property that they hold rights to. They can't be changed, so.
Wendy, did you have any other larger points? Especially with David here.
No, I just, it was, to Heidi's point, it was confusing to me to know what feedback, David, you have already received and hadn't already received, because there was a lot of conversation and consolidation of comments, but it sounds as if that you did not receive that yet, so that we have to wait until the next version of the draft.
But it's helpful to clarify for my purposes, though, where I have you all together to be clear about what are some of those commonalities, the things that you all share that these are some changes you would like to see made. I may get a comment from one person or another says, I love this, I hate this. That doesn't help me make a distinction as to, so ultimately what's the direction the commission wants to go, unless I know that is something everybody wants.
We need a process check-in though, David, because any comments that you're receiving from Chris are ones that we've already hashed through and kind of deliberated on and either deferred to the individual comment, like, sure, architecture, we had no objection and we wrestled it through, and then the remaining document which is why Chris Flynn did not want us all individually sending you emails. So what you're receiving from Chris Flynn represents the consensus, at least as far as we could get to from this group. Then we reserve the right to see what you take of that feedback and how much of it, we're still comfortable with or not comfortable with.
So where we're
really
at,
helpful.
so where we're at, we're through batch 1. We've got a little bit left of batch 2, and we'll be jumping into batch 3 on the 29th. And I think, well, I've seen 2 planning commissioners' comments. They were they kind of mirrored each other. If all the comments mirror each other, it should be a pretty defined work session to be able to punch it through to get you those things. And we really have very little left on batch 2. And basically what we need to do is the reconsolidation of batch 1 just needs to be organized better. So you get it and you'll be able to decipher it better, David.
Okay. No, that will be helpful.
I don't have any specific, you don't have any specifics? Okay, I think since have so many people who came to this meeting this evening, which we're very delighted to have so many people here. I do, even though we didn't have it on the agenda, I do want to welcome some public comment, but I want to keep it a little bit in a box because we did not expect to see a lot of people here and we did not intend to have a big dialogue with public today. So I will say, if you have any comment, just know you saw the schedule. We have 2 more months of work on this project. You have plenty of time. You can call Chris Flynn. You can email Chris Flynn.
There we go.
You can email Chris Flynn. You can request a meeting with Chris Flynn, with me and Chris. We'll be meeting again with David. So there are many, many, many opportunities. So don't look at this as like speak now or forever hold your peace. It's exactly the opposite of not speak now or forever hold your peace. However, to be fair, I do want to invite anybody who really has a burning comment that you are welcome to make it. So, but please keep your comments. There's a lot of people on to like 2 minutes max, okay? You can come forward. We'll hear from people in the room first, and then we'll use raised hand on the video,
Make sure you introduce
on
yourself.
the Zoom.
Yes, I will. I'm Bill Butler. Who do you face? How do you do this? That?
I think
Commission.
you face the whole commission. The camera can get you.
Okay, this is fabulous. You're doing a wonderful job. I'm so impressed. One thing I mentioned before, when we had facade types, that there weren't any accommodations for ramps. And I want to make sure, just like talking about, well, it's not pedestrian. No, people can't climb stairs anymore.
He did add a thing about ramps.
Okay.
I can tell you that.
Okay, thank you. This walkability, we want to design a lot of underground parking. And we don't want impediments to that. Like the building we intend to build as a major building has underground parking under its entirety. So, and we want to scatter that around the project. And just so you know, that we're talking about building a 100,000 square foot building. And I would like not to be precluded from doing that within this whole process. That would be our main building. It would hold a restaurant, a clinic, a hair salon, and and a rehab gym. So that's public space on the first floor, but it takes up a lot of space. And if we're going to have enough volume of people to attract professional help, I'm thinking of seniors, it has to be a large enough building to do this with elevators and all of that. So please don't lose sight of the size of the building that we are thinking of. It's 100,000 square feet. It's an old New England hotel style building, but it's not small. Thank you.
Will you have
Thank
a
you.
swimming pool?
What?
A swimming pool?
Shall I answer that?
No.
Yes, but only a small one. It'll be a rehab pool, and then we're gonna have a jitney. I would like to build a pool just like St. Albans has, but I can't figure out where to put it. But in the meantime, we'll be driving to St. Albans at least once a week. If anyone has been there, you're impressed already. If you haven't, you should. This is what I imagine Jericho and Underhill having. I don't know where to put it, Eric. But
There's a lot of public interest in a public pool.
we want it. We want it.
Okay, thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Anybody else in the room?
Yes,
Yes. Hello.
hello. I'm Elizabeth Bernstein, and I'm a member of the public. I have family, children and siblings all over the country. What I do not want is a development that when I walk into it, I could be in California or in Oklahoma or in North Carolina. Um, uh, Market Street in South Burlington and all of that whole development. I have wonderful friends on the design committee, and so don't you dare mention that I said this. But it's horrible because you could be anywhere in the country. And the thing about living in Jericho in particular is that we like to think of ourselves as individuals, and we have individual tastes. And so why can't we put up a transparent or translucent awning? And I think I'm getting very nervous about all of this prescriptive stuff. I'm very nervous about that. I want it to reflect this place. I don't want it to reflect really nice current architecture. Church Street, which is a real attraction, was built higgledy-piggledy. And the fact that it had a street and then they took the cars out of it, except for the cross streets, is what made it fun. So put in the people, put the buildings that you want, put the uses that you want, and they please don't make them all look alike. That would be just awful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else in the room? Okay, anybody online, if you would raise your hand, and I see, is that the first hand that got raised? Okay. Hi, Chuck.
Hi, everybody. What the presentation sounded like, eventually, if someone wanted to build a house, they'd talk to a builder, and the builder would say, you got to go down to town hall and pick out your house design. If you want to get a permit, you got to pick a house that's been designed by the town. That sounds, that does sound like Disney. It sounds like East Germany. And it's really kind of the wrong direction. The why for me is why you hire a consultant and then spend month after month after month negotiating with a consultant to get what you want. You know, be clear. In a word, does anything go when it comes to porches? Yes. That's really easy. There does not need to be a single drawing of a structure in the zoning regulations. Not one. We're trying to break a norm. The town plan is very clear. We're trying to reserve the preponderance of town for the wealthy and to contain people of lower and middle incomes in a small area. And then we're going to design the houses that they have to choose. And we're going to make sure they're expensive. And we're going to continue the same 50-year pattern. We need to allow innovation in the limited area where we've chosen for low and middle income people, for new house designs and more creativity. This is worse than Disney. It's Disney and East Germany combined.
Got it.
Thank you. Anybody else online have a raised hand? Sabina, can you see?
Yeah, I can. No, nobody.
Okay, thank you very much. It is 8:30. We have to move on.
Oh, wait a minute.
Okay, sorry, Wayne. Hi, Wayne. 2 minutes.
Muted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just very briefly, I just wanted to express the other side of the coin of this plan-a-palooza. There was a quid pro quo. If we were going to have a great deal of specificity, it was going to enable it, it was going to expedite a developer being able to get in there and actually do something. That was sort of the other side of the coin for doing this. And I'm still hopeful that, there'll be some little small sliver of affordable housing and that Wisdom House will come to fruition. But I just wish, as this revision proceeds, we are aware of what impediments there may be to actually putting a shovel in the ground. I think, to Chuck's point, some of those things would expedite putting a shovel in the ground. I'm just aware that, in a time long, long ago, Jericho East was part of a town plan. And halfway through developing Jericho East, the ground changed out of all of this, and he was sort of left in a limbo, and there was never really the completion of that project, be that as it may, pluses and minuses. I just want to cite that this is an opportunity to see if there are impediments other than 13.1 approval process, which just seems like there's little progress there, to make sure we're weeding out some of the impediments to make it easier for somebody to actually put a shovel on the ground. So having said that, thank you so much for all your hard work. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Wayne.
Yes, John.
John. Hello.
Hello. I just want to say thank you for wrestling with all this and really engaging in some really tough questions regarding zoning. I would have to say that communities without zoning generally devolve to chaos, and there's no form or function or clarity there. But figuring out how to come up with zoning that brings the community that you want while allowing for flexibility is not easy. So I just really appreciate your hard work on this. Thank you.
Thank you. It is hard, feels hard, so thank you. Anybody else, Sabina?
Well, Sabina's had to
I
reboot.
have a little technical issue,
Oh,
but not to my knowledge.
okay, well, just a reminder, again, any comments can be emailed to Chris Flynn, and he will share those with us.
What's the rest of his address?
Chris Flynn, can you give your email address?
The email is cflynn, which is FLINN, @jerichobt.gov. If you don't want Generica, show up at the DRB hearings.
Okay, so now we're gonna move on to our next agenda item. Yes. Okay, any reports from the planners?
Thank
Does
you,
anything
Susan.
share
I'm
with
gonna
us?
skip out now.
Okay,
Thanks, Dave.
thank you, David.
David. Put your knee up.
No updates for me. Although thank everyone for scheduling time to meet. I've really enjoyed getting to know all of you and figuring out what the priorities are, so.
Okay, Chris Flynn, do you have anything for us?
No, we are going to meet on the 29th, and we're going to be sending you something that Chris put together probably the next day or two. And we will recap what we need to revisit a few sections of batch 2, and then we'll jump into batch 3. If you have comments, get them to me, because that way we can distribute them as opposed to not distributing them. Beyond that, no, I don't have any.
Did you get
Process question.
You got mine, right?
No. The only comments I received Wendy's and Chris's. Those are the only comments I received.
Right, I have some, and I'll send them to you.
Do you want that? So part of the reason you didn't get mine is because I was using the Google Doc instead of the PDF, and so it just got really messy. Do you want, is it okay if I highlight comment, or do you want me to put it into a table?
Well, either way, so if you end up sending me something in a Word doc, then what I can do is I can respond, an answer or a comment. And then I can share that with everybody so they can see.
If that's what you prefer,
Yeah,
or
that
I
would-
can comment on this PDF now that I know how to do that. Which would you
Okay.
prefer?
Send it to me however you want to send it.
You don't care?
I'll figure it out.
I think.
Oh, actually, I won't figure it out because I don't know how to figure it out, but I'll find somebody to figure it out.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I want to make, I know it's a big job to pull together everybody, so I want to, if there's a way that makes it more streamlined, I'm.
Well, we may
happy
have
to do
that way.
Right, but I'm a little worried. So are you thinking that we're gonna be retyping in our comments into the table? Because Wendy and Chris already gave you comments, I have comments, Heidi has.
Okay, well,
comments,
Wendy and
Sabina-
Chris don't have to. The rest of you may have to use the table or give me your comments and you won't. So let's, we'll move it forward. So, yeah, I don't have the answer to that. So Chris developed a matrix to provide comments, whether we use it or whether it gets used or not. We'll have to see. If it's going to be an issue, we'll just follow the path that we have to get it done, because then we can just transport that back to David, and he's going to rework the 3 batches based on our comments.
I think using the table that I pulled together now is just going to be more confusion. There's been a process that's been set up that's been working. So let's just keep going through using the process that's already been in place and that's been
There
working.
you go. No retyping.
Okay, so just make a reference to the section number and then what the comment
Just
or the
like you have
question
in the
is.
past. Yep.
And what I would say though is after this set, if we want to move to all tables for the next set, then we can do that if that will make it easier for all of you. Because it's a lot to get from 7 different people. So
Yeah.
happy to follow that maybe for the next time.
And the reality is, to me, is that sometimes if you see Chris's comments or Wendy's comments, they may answer your questions
Right.
already, or for the concerns may be gone. So all of a sudden, if it comes from, the beauty is we don't have 7 people, we have 6, so we're down to 1. So that's helpful. But it's, I think it's important that everybody shares because you're responsible for coming up with it. And as I always tell the DRB, when you make a decision, you need to understand the decision, you need to be able to defend the decision and stand behind the decision. And the same goes for you guys here with regards to your regulations. If you have to fight for something, you gotta fight for it. So.
Thank you. Okay, any updates from any planning commission people?
Affordable Housing Committee is moribund at this point. Nothing to report from them.
Sabina and I attended the Trails Committee meeting, which is the Bicycle Pedestrian Connectivity Committee meeting, and they're talking with Local Motion about how to potentially do like a demonstration project in the spring to bring some facility of some sort to Raceway from maybe the senior housing community down to the market. Whether or not they separate a portion of the dirt road and improve the intersection there, they're kind of thinking about doing something like that to build some awareness of that connection. I also asked them to think about whether or not they'd be able to take on updating the 2015 bike ped plan in 2025, potentially hiring a consultant to help them do that. Is there anything else that they said that was interesting?
I think those are the big,
Yeah.
the big things.
Some of us went to the town meeting reimagined, had a pretty good turnout, 40 some odd people were there. They explained the budget process. They had breakout groups and the breakout groups talked about high level concerns. I don't think, I read all the notes. We didn't hear anything different than what we heard while we were working on the town plan. So that seems pretty consistent.
Oakland did a great job. Just for those of you who weren't there, she represented the plan and the connection between the plan and the capital plan beautifully. So I really just wanted to congratulate you on doing that, because I think sort of the more that we can work together with the select board also in sort of making the connection between the plan and the budget is really helpful. And I really felt like you just did such a nice job.
Thank you. And since then, a couple of select board people have asked a little bit more about the getting it done list and what's the list and how should we review the list. So I know that those conversations about bringing that into their agenda has definitely influenced them. So that we will see. And the 90% wastewater report is done. And you can read it, it's posted online, or it's posted, there was a link. And the engineer is presenting to the select board this Thursday at 6:30 PM. So I'll attend that meeting, and if other people would be interested, but you can definitely read the report if you can't find the link. It's in Front Porch Forum, I think Linda posted it there. Okay, any other updates? Other business? We have other business?
So I assume everybody's available for the 29th of.
I will not be here.
Okay.
My apologies, but I will send you my comments in
Sure.
advance and I'll read whatever else. Yeah, I'll be on the road.
That's fine. As long as we have 4, we'll be good.
I will be here unless the soccer team keeps winning.
Yes.
Then I will not be here.
Okay, well, hopefully you won't be here. Now we're down at 4. Okay,
I'll
nobody else
be
here?
remote.
Okay, perfect. I will be here.
I'll be here.
Perfect. Okay.
Here. So the 29th, we're gonna finish batch 2,
Yep.
and we're gonna also talk about batch 3. And, we may or may not have another interview if anybody else applies.
Yeah, I'll know. I don't know if the 21st is the last day, so I'll know on the 22nd or I'll know on the 21st. So,
Okay.
and,
It's a hot ticket, so.
well, a guy came in very interested and I told him the process and whether he executes or not. We'll see. And it's, so we'll see.
Okay. All right, anything else? All right, then, I will take a motion. I guess I can make a motion. I'll make a motion to go into executive session to discuss personnel.
So we need, pretty much everybody online to leave.
Yes. So thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. The planning commission is going into executive session, and then we will adjourn immediately thereafter.
I will second you. Did you need one?
Yes.
I'll second you.
So,
Okay.
yes, so executive session, you're second, okay. Thank you.
All right, so. I'm
Do we
going
vote on that as well?
Yes.
All in favor. I'll let that be recorded for the.
Okay, so all in favor of entering executive session?
All right.
Aye.